Alexa, you just a few months ago got this amazing job at Placements.io. During the time when lots of people struggled to get a job, but you still got this wonderful opportunity. You became the head of the team, right? So what was it like? What was your experience looking for a job and then eventually getting this great opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, the job market has been pretty tough these last 6 to 9 months, and it's very different than how it was, say, like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And recruiting candidates was almost like the housing market. People were, bidding on candidates. They're getting multiple offers. You're just trying to stay as competitive as possible. And then things really shifted in terms of the tech market. And then, all these companies were doing layoffs. So I was in a position where I was looking for a new role. My last company was doing a ton of layoffs and was just not doing great financially, and was looking for something different. And the market was incredibly challenging and competitive. There were recruiters being laid off left and right. I happened to get lucky that, the CEO of my company reached out to me on LinkedIn, and it just sounded like a really interesting opportunity, and it sounded different. I had been at, all these pre-IPO unicorns where we were, growing and scaling so quickly, getting all this additional funding and money from venture capital. And then we're missing our sales numbers, and then we're forced to let people go. So when I spoke to my CEO, it was a very different kind of a company and a very different mission statement that he had. And it was really appealing to me because he had turned down money from venture capital and hadn't accepted money since 2014 because the company was profitable, and he wants to grow and scale, but he wants to do it slowly and organically and not be in a position where he's, getting all this money from venture capital and forced to grow too fast and overhire like so many of these companies have in the past. So that was something that was different to me and really interesting and appealing. And that was why I was really drawn to the opportunity. And then I think also, to take what I had learned, I was on the agency side for a long time, and then I worked in-house and helped, grow and scale these companies. And I was able to see what worked really well, and then also what didn't, and learn from that, and be able to come into this role and really build out the whole recruiting process and build out a recruiting playbook. So that was something that was really interesting to me, rather than coming into a company where everything is already set up and they have all the systems in place, being able to, make that my own.
Awesome. Well, we have plenty of topics to discuss. And you say that you were kind of lucky because the CEO approached you, but I'm sure it was not just luck, but also experience. I mean, you've been in recruiting for the last 10 years plus, right? So,
exactly.
And you also worked in different areas. It was not just IT recruiting, but I guess you also recruited sales and telco and other roles. Could you compare the IT recruiting with all these other non-IT, non-tech roles? Like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? How different is it?
It's very different. So yeah, when I was on the agency side, I did a lot of technical recruiting, like software engineers and developers and DevOps and product. And then, my last 2 in-house roles, it was primarily like G&A roles and all go-to-market. So some of those go-to-market roles, like a sales engineer, professional services, which is post-sales, can be technical, but obviously not the same as recruiting a software developer or an engineer. So there's definitely a huge difference and kind of a different approach and technique that you have to take when recruiting technical versus non-technical people. I find that technical people are more drawn to equity. That's something that's really important to them. I think, salespeople are obviously very driven by money and compensation. So there's different kind of things for each role, but it's definitely, you have to take kind of a different approach in terms of how you sell the candidate and how you approach them.
Interesting that you say about the equity, because obviously in the United States, people kind of like to have the equity, but here in Europe, where I'm based, people in IT don't seem to care that much about equity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we didn't have that many exits, right? So people usually kind of well, they know what is it, right? What is ESOP and equity and whatnot, but they are like, oh well, that's someone else will get it, not me. So at least that's the
Yeah.
attitude overall that people here in Europe have. They don't value it as much.
I think there's not as much of that now on the technical side, just because of kind of the state of the economy in the tech market. But definitely years ago during the tech boom, they were very focused on it.
Hmm. Awesome. And you also worked in a staffing agency, right? And now you
Mhm.
work as the internal recruiter. So could you also compare these two for people who have never worked in any of these two types of companies? Like, what's the difference? I mean, it sounds the same, right? It's a recruiter. So what would you say is the main difference?
Yeah, they're very different. So I think on the agency side, you're working with a lot of different clients. So you're representing, multiple different clients that you have. It could be a larger client or a mid-sized, company or a startup. And so you're, kind of maneuvering with all these different roles for each of those companies and clients. And it's definitely more kind of high volume in that sense. I think when you're in-house, obviously it's very challenging as well, but you're able to kind of represent one company and work really closely with these specific hiring managers and be face to face with them, so it's easier in that sense. And then also you have more applicants coming through and networking events and things like that. So they're definitely challenging in different ways, but I think I learned a very good skill set from doing agency recruiting that was able to help me be impactful and successful in what I do now in house.
Mm. And would you say that the in-house recruiting is less stressful? Is it true or not?
Not less stressful, just different. Um, I think agency, you're juggling a lot more in terms of juggling like multiple clients, where in house, you're really just focused on one client and customer. But in that sense, it's more challenging just because you have more pressure from that
Hmm.
one, person that you're representing.
Yeah, yeah. And in a staffing agency, you also get bonuses or commissions for placed candidates, right?
Yeah,
It's
so it's almost like a sales role where,
Mhm.
you get compensated based on commission, where, in-house, usually you have like a higher base, but you don't have as big of like a bonus structure. So
Mhm.
it's really, I think, now it might be more challenging to be doing agency in the current market.
Yeah, yeah. That is indeed. So to people who are kind of just wondering what to do next, what should be their next career step, what would you advise at this point? Should they consider the staffing agency world or rather join a company internally? What's the market like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different paths you can go if you want to move into recruiting and you have, no experience. I think you can either start out doing agency and then eventually, move into an in-house role, or you can take a job at a company in-house as like a recruiting coordinator or a sourcer and eventually move into a recruiting role.
Hmm.
So starting in like a more junior entry level role and then eventually moving into like a full cycle recruiting position.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And some recruiters also consider starting an agency on their own. So often it's a one-man show kind of an agency. Is it also something you've been considering, contemplating in the past, or you are not drawn towards this?
I've definitely thought about it, but it's challenging to run your own company, right?
Mhm.
For a lot of different reasons, just in terms of like financially, from a business perspective, doing everything on your own is tough. So it's definitely something that's interesting, but
Mhm.
I really enjoy working in house, and it's really exciting to help grow and scale a company, and really enjoy that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, there are different pros and cons of all of these options.
Exactly.
So definitely the path that you chose is probably now a bit less stressful because, as you mentioned, now the staffing agencies may have less work, less demand because of what's going on the market. So then, when
Yeah, and
someone,
it's tough too because they're competing with the internal recruiters as well.
oh
So
yeah, yeah,
it's
that's
challenging.
actually that's good. Good that you mentioned it. It's now it just reminds me the cooperation between the internal recruiters and the staffing agency recruiters. So there is usually this clash between these two, right? Or at least from my experience, it feels like often.
Yeah.
So how do you overcome this? Because you've been working on both sides of the table.
overcome working
Well,
with staffing agencies.
yeah, I mean, the clash between these two, like if you imagine someone who is in a staffing agency, they are kind of competing with you, right? And often, from my experience, the corporate HR also often doesn't want to work with the agency world because they see it as, kind of a competing unit, external unit, or you don't
Yeah,
have
I
experience.
think sometimes it can be competitive. I think like in the case of, my company and my last company, we really only used agencies if we had like a very specific niche role that was maybe like, we're not an expert in that, maybe like a very like high level role or a very specific engineering role. So in that case, if I'm not an expert on that, I would love to partner with an agency and leverage that and use their help just because that's not my bread and butter if it's like an R&D role or something like that. So for me, I prefer working with them in that kind of a situation. I just think some staffing companies are working with in-house recruiters and trying to hire a number of different roles, and then the internal recruiters are also working on those, so that can be challenging.
Hmm. And this actually reminds me, inside the community, we were discussing with a few guys who are trying to do the business development, and they, do the client outreach to people like you actually, because you are the head of recruiting, right, at Placements.io. So you must also receive plenty of these messages on LinkedIn.
All the time.
Mhm. Yeah, all the time, all the time. So this actually could be very interesting to hear your point of view. Like, what's the best way to get to someone like you? Now when you receive all these messages, they all kind of look the same, I guess, right? Like, hey, this is Joe. I'm doing recruiting. Can I work with your company? Can I send you some candidates? So, just building up on what you mentioned just a while ago, like, what would be the best way to for someone to reach out to you and say like, hey, can we work with you?
Yeah, I think it's important to come up with a message that stands out and that's going to get the attention. If it's just like a very generic, we're a staffing agency, we'd love to work with you. I think maybe if like I have like a very niche role posted, or they kind of call out something about, the company or the hiring that's going to grab my attention, then I'm going to be more likely to, you know, want to work with them than if it's just like a very generic email that they're sending to everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are plenty of these around, right?
Yeah,
Every day. That's crazy.
exactly.
Well, cold emails, cold messages, cold
It's
emails.
It's hard. Yeah. I mean, when I was on the agency side, I was doing business development too and just reaching out to, different people and, trying to get their attention. It's tough. So I feel like, whatever I would use to try to get people's attention, I look for the same kind of thing when people reach out to me.
Awesome. And besides these cold messages and cold calls or whatever, called online, what else would work kind of for you, you know, in a positive way if someone approached you, I don't know, on a networking event or they bump to you on a street, or how they can just start doing business with a company like yours?
Yeah, networking events are good. I remember when I was on the agency side, I would go to various different networking events and, try to meet with people and give them my business card. I mean, I think it's a little bit different now in the post-COVID era, but I think it's always easier talking to somebody face to face versus sending like a cold email.
Yeah, so true, so true. Okay, cool. So coming back to the team, we discussed the differences between the staffing agency and the internal team, right? So once someone decides to join a team like yours, for example, and they don't have any experience, they are just junior recruiters in IT, so tech recruiters, what should they do? Like how they can get a job in a company like yours, and then once they get it, like what should they do to upskill themselves? Like what would be your best advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was going to be hiring a very junior recruiter, I would probably either look for somebody, like I was saying before, to be a coordinator or a sourcer and kind of learn the business and do a lot of shadowing in terms of like my calls, like, initial screens, what the process looks like. And then like the closing call with negotiation and be able to learn from that and then eventually move into a recruiter role. I think, sourcing is obviously a great way to get started in terms of really navigating LinkedIn Recruiter, and then figuring out how to screen different types of candidates and then like master that part of it. in terms of like the pitching the company, the actual sourcing, and then being able to learn how to close a candidate. So I think, it's definitely a process. I think there's not as many like entry level junior recruiters nowadays, especially with the market. So I think, it's good to start from the ground up and just learn.
Yeah, that's a good idea to start with the search or research, or even the coordination, as you mentioned. So by coordination, I guess you are referring to the interview setup and follow-ups, right?
Exactly. And learn the structured interview process, sit in on, calls with hiring managers, what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of learn the overall business.
And is this a dedicated standalone role in your company, like this coordinator?
So I actually we do have somebody who coordinates all of our interviews. We don't have a sourcer right now. That's definitely something I would love to hire down the line, just as we continue to grow and scale. Could definitely help me, just because, I can only have so many hours in a day to, talk to people and screen candidates.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then what would be for you the positive sign on someone's CV or resume? Because like assuming that you would be hiring this sourcer, you would get dozens or hundreds of job applications, right? So you will start looking at them, and these are juniors, so they will most likely not have any experience with recruiting. So what would you be looking at? What would you like to see on the resumes and CVs and the LinkedIn profiles or whatever? What would be the positive sign for you to invite someone for an interview?
Yeah, so if it's somebody more junior, maybe somebody with some somewhat relevant experience, maybe they've done like an internship at like a tech company or something like that. Also maybe like any sort of extracurricular activities in college that they did. I feel like people, who've done sports in college or, are in like a sorority and they've done like fundraising, things like that. Those are good skill sets to find for this kind of role, especially, recruiting and sales are so similar.
Mhm.
Feel like, people who play sports are very driven and motivated and competitive.
Yeah.
Fundraising is definitely like a similar kind of skill set. So I find those types of people are successful.
Mhm.
And I actually did sales before I moved into recruiting.
Mm, wonderful. Okay, okay, that's interesting that you say the sales itself, because I mean now with the talent shortage, we also need to sell to those candidates, right? The opportunities.
Yeah, you're selling the opportunity, you're selling the company, and you're dealing with a lot of other competition. So
Mhm.
it's not, you're not selling a product, and then you're ultimately selling a person to the company and the CEO and everybody. So, when I put people through the interview process and, maybe there's something I see that my CEO doesn't or somebody else in the leadership team, I have to sell them in terms of their experience, their capabilities, why they'd be a good fit. So I feel like I've, been able to take what I learned from doing sales right out of college and being able to implement that in my career later on.
Very cool, very cool. So what was your thought process about these you know pitches, if we can call it, job pitches? How do you, when do you start, or is it something intentional, or do you just somehow do it naturally? How do you go about it?
Yeah, I think it's really important with the first initial call or pitch. You have to really sell the candidate on, you know, the company, the culture, the product, why they should go there. You have to come up with like a really strong elevator pitch, essentially. So I always, kind of write something out and tell a really compelling story in terms of how the company was started, what the founder's mission is, our growth. And I think if you're able to do that successfully, then you're able to get the candidate interested and get them through the interview process.
Hmm. So always be selling, right?
Yeah.
In all stages of the process.
Exactly. And then just keeping, in close contact with them throughout the whole interview process, a lot of touch points, texts, emails, so that they feel, valued throughout the whole interview process and they want to work for your company.
Awesome. So after all these years in recruiting, what do you still find so exciting about it? Like what, wakes you up in the morning and you are full of energy, like, hey, I'm doing recruiting after all those years. What's the thing? What do you still enjoy?
Yeah, I love it. For me, I love finding somebody that's going to be the perfect fit for the role. and then just also like a good match for just the team and helping to grow the overall company and culture. So I love that. I also love negotiating and closing. That's also really fun and exciting for me. I think, I did sales right out of college, and there were definitely a ton of aspects that I liked about it, but I always felt guilty about asking people for money. So I
Hmm.
feel like this is like my way of selling, but I'm really, selling a person and helping them find the right kind of, company and role for them. And for me, that's really exciting and rewarding.
Hmm. And now when you mention negotiations, do you also negotiate the salary with the candidate, or are you rather on the other side of the fence when you say, hey, we just extend an offer and then the candidate either accepts it or not?
So yeah, definitely negotiating with the candidate. At my last company, we did a lot of, we had a lot of data points in terms of like leveling. So we were able to, figure out based on years of experience, like what the person should come in at compensation wise, like a range, and also based on their location. So, been able to kind of figure out like what does that look like, being able to kind of level people just based on years of experience and tenure and things like that. And then, working with them to try to find it, an offer that makes sense to them and is right for them as well as the company.
So then when you extend the offer, you no longer negotiate with the candidate, if I understand correctly. I'm just kind of to take a step back. I'm asking because there are two streams, kind of, on these extremes. Like one says, like, hey, we want to negotiate with the candidate to make sure that we are on the same page, and the other stream is like, hey, we don't negotiate. We just say this is the number, and then the candidate either accepts the offer or not. We don't want to have these negotiations. So where you guys are at?
Yeah, I usually try, to leave a little wiggle room for
Mhm.
negotiation, but not to try to get it too too out of hand.
Yeah.
So there's always a little wiggle room, and then you hit a point where you
Mhm.
just settle at a number
You get tired of it,
or
right?
equity or
Yeah.
something like that. Exactly.
Awesome, awesome. Or you can start, you shift the discussion to negotiate about, let's say, number of hours per week. I just saw it here in Europe when they say like, hey, the salary is fixed, but if you don't want to work 40 hours, it could be 39 per week. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
creative.
Or now I think a lot of candidates are trying to negotiate like how many days a week to go into the
Yeah,
office.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Because I think people want to go into the office, but they obviously don't want to go in 5 days a week just because things have changed since COVID.
hmm. So where are you guys at with regards to the remote work? Do you all work from the office, including software engineers?
We're hybrid 3 days a week.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really good balance because you're able to work remotely 2 days and you can pick the days. It's not set days of the week, which is nice. I
Hmm.
think for me personally, working remotely for so long, I actually enjoy being in an office again. It feels like normalcy.
Hmm.
Uh, but every now and then I'll talk to people that only want to be remote or they don't want to be hybrid. But I feel like for the most part, people are okay with like 2 to 3 days a week in office.
Hmm. And if it is 2 or 3 days at the office, is it still remote, or is it actually be called differently? I'm just wondering, like, whether the word remote is
So it's
the
called hybrid.
the
Yeah. So
hybrid
remote is usually like fully remote.
full remote. Hmm.
Yeah. And then if you're going into the office, any days of the week, you say hybrid.
Okay, cool. Okay, so coming back to recruiting, actually, which we started with, like there are plenty of recruiters in our community who also look for some tips and tricks and maybe some tools. So, is there any tool that comes to your mind, something that is cool and your favorite tool, something that you would like to recommend besides those kind of obvious tools like LinkedIn Recruiter, like that
Sure.
everyone knows?
Yeah. We used Gem at my last company. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a great tool.
Hmm.
It's it's a sourcing tool, but it also has, a ton of other functions in terms of like building reports and things like that. So that was really useful. And
Hmm.
you can also, send on behalf of. So we would use that at my last company. Like if you're reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, you're not getting responses, you could like send on behalf of somebody else at the company. You could send it on behalf of like the CFO or the CEO. And usually that, generates more of a response than just coming from the recruiter.
Oh, that's very cool. And do you send it from their email inbox
Mhm.
outbox?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's very
And
cool.
you can also send sequences. So
Mhm.
you could set up a sequence where you're, sending them, I don't know, an email maybe like once every 3 weeks or something like that, so that you're able to, generate more of a response that way than just sending an email and then kind of forgetting about them.
Mhm. Awesome. So what's the name? Gem? Like
Gem,
G
yeah, GEM.
Gem. Okay, cool, cool. I'll link it in the show notes. Wonderful.
So
Okay.
that's a very data-driven tool. We also use that to, build out reports, and you can send those to your hiring managers, and it's like an easy way for them to access that.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll check it out. Great. So, is there anything you would like to recommend or suggest to people who are transitioning to tech recruiting? You've been in this industry for several years, right? So, what would be your, best advice to people who are kind of looking for the next big thing in their career?
Yeah, I think networking events are super important. Just being
Mhm.
able to, meet with different types of people and learn their backgrounds. Um, I think also listening to different types of webinars.
Mhm.
I still do that just to learn about like industry trends and, different companies in the SaaS industry. So I think those are, really helpful things. I think, if you want to get into recruiting, I think, like I said, there's a couple different ways you can go about that, either doing the agency side, which is like more salesy, or
Mhm.
moving into like a recruiting coordinator or sourcer role and just kind of learning the business, and shadowing recruiters and, seeing how they operate.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. And also, finding a great company like yours, right?
Yes,
So with
exactly.
great atmosphere, growing business, great mission, as you said at the beginning. So
Yeah. I mean, my company, I got super lucky. It's an incredible culture, amazing leadership team. So it doesn't feel like work.
wonderful. Well, that's the best. That's the best. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks a lot for all your insights about the market, about how to transition to recruiting and thrive eventually. So where can people find a bit more about you and connect with you?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
Yeah. Add me
Awesome.
on LinkedIn.
Awesome. So I'll add the link to your profile in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah. And I'm always happy to, hop on a call with somebody if they're early in their career, answer questions for them,
Mhm.
or just stay connected.
Wonderful. Cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot for all your insights. And yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.